Well, it only took a few hours, but the long-awaited ceasefire in Iran is already on shaky ground. Last night, the United States, Israel and Iran agreed to a 2-week halt in the fighting, less than 90 minutes before Donald Trump's 8 p.m. deadline to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. All sides hailed the agreement as a victory, but it appears to be unravelling. Iran's now reportedly closed the vital shipping passage again in response to Israel's continuing attacks on Lebanon, the largest airstrikes on targets in the Lebanese capital since the conflict with Hezbollah broke out last month, according to the Israeli military. The US and Israel say halting operations there were never part of the ceasefire deal. Gulf states are also reporting new attacks from Iran following the ceasefire announcement. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country is ready to restart the fight against Iran at any moment.
We have more objectives to complete, and we will achieve them, either through agreement or by resuming the fighting, because we are prepared to return to combat at any moment necessary. Our finger is on the trigger.
Well, an American negotiation team led by US Vice President J.D. Vance is heading to Pakistan for talks with Iran, scheduled for Saturday. Earlier today, the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said US-Israeli forces had completed what he called a capital V military victory and that a final wave of more than 800 strikes had destroyed Iran's defense industrial base.
What little they have left buried in bunkers is all they will have. They can still shoot, we know that. Their command and control is so decimated they can't really talk and coordinate. So they still may shoot here and there, but that would be very, very unwise. But they can no longer build missiles, build rockets, build launchers, or build UAVs. Their factories have been razed to the ground, set back in historic fashion.
Well, let's see where we are in this war with Dr. Stephen Wills. He's from the Centre for Maritime Strategy. He's an expert in US Navy strategy and policy. Welcome to DW, Dr. Wills. We have this deal, still in theory, both sides claiming the ceasefire as a victory. What do you think? Is this an American victory?
It really depends upon a great many things. As always, with many things, it depends. Primarily on what initial U.S. and/or Israeli objectives were. You can claim victory if you meet the objectives. And certainly the Iranians, in turn, if their objective was to remain in power, the regime that's currently there, they could claim victory too. So I totally see how all sides in this case can claim victory based on their own assumptions.
Right.
But it really depends upon other factors, I think, as to what the long-term situation remains.
The Iranians, though, the mullahs, as you say, are still in power, and they can claim to have faced down the most powerful military force in the world.
Well, yes, they have. At the same time, and I've pointed this out to some other too, the total U.S. military footprint deployed against Iran is significantly smaller than what you saw in the 2003 Operation Iraqi Freedom that toppled Saddam Hussein, and much smaller yet still than the 1990-1991 Desert Shield, Desert Storm operation. Just in terms of naval strength alone in those past conflicts, the Navy deployed 6 and 5 aircraft carriers, respectively, and a significant amount of naval aviation, along with much more Air Force and coalition allied air support as well. This time there's less there, and with that less firepower, it takes more time to service all of the targets. So yes, anybody can claim victory. They're still standing. It really depends upon, again, what your objective is. And if your objective is to remain in power, then the Iranians can claim victory. But it's something of a hollow victory, given the extreme losses in military equipment that they are believed to have suffered as a result of this campaign. And they fired a lot of their stocks, too. So whilst many want to talk about U.S. needs to replace weapons fired during the conflict so far, the Iranians will also have to replace those weapons. And if their ability to do so has been damaged by bombing, or if outside sources are more restricted, that'll be a problem for them.
Right. On the Strait of Hormuz, Are we any clearer on whether Iran did, in fact, mine this vital waterway? And if so, who's going to be responsible for demining?
That is a great question, Phil. There have been a couple reports that had very strangely precise numbers, saying that Iran had laid 12 very specific types of mines in some area. I'm not so sure there's large numbers of Iranian mines. They may be. They've been credited for many years as possessing upward of 5,000 to 6,000 mines of all types. Everything from sort of World War II era contact mines, the familiar shape in the water with spikes on it, to much more modern bottom influence mines that resemble rocks or pieces of debris on the bottom that are much harder to locate. So it's possible the Iranians laid mines, but they seem quite content to perform functions in the Strait of Hormuz to threaten shipping with missiles and drones. You don't see mines present.
Right.
They don't appear to be present. And the last thing I would say is that if mines were there, I think shipping companies would be very wary of going through there because, as you suggest, cleaning up mines is messy, difficult, and time-consuming. And if the Iranian regime wants to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and make money off of it, they don't want to spend a lot of time clearing mines to do that.
Good point. Here's the thing, again, we'll stick with the strait for now. Latest reports from the area indicate that Iran has, in fact, closed the strait again because of what it says is because of Israel's continued attacks on Lebanon. So this is going to be a problem going forward, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Now, UN law of the sea is very specific about what an international waterway, such as the Strait of Hormuz, is, and that innocent passage cannot be restricted. Now, of course, Iran is not a signatory of UNCLOS, neither is the United States. But in practice, both nations have conformed to that convention's policies. So closing an international strait like that is a severe blow, I think, to the international order. International straits are supposed to be innocent passage where commercial traffic can travel unfettered. And if they're going to continue to do this kind of a toll booth method for collecting a fee, it's almost like a criminal shakedown of people, something you see organized crime do. So I think it's going to be a problem, and it sets a very bad precedent in other places in the world where others might try and restrict the free flow of commerce.
Okay, let's this ceasefire is looking very shaky at the moment. Attacks from both sides continued even after the announcement was made. Now there are reports, as I say, that Iran has stopped these ships passing through the strait. Is this what you would expect? We who are not military aligned, we hear ceasefire, we think that's it, all the shooting stops. But often that's not the case. Often the stopping is quite ragged.
Yes, it can be quite ragged. Even after agreements are made, shooting continues. You know, very famously, the First World War's official end for that armistice was set at whatever midnight on the day in November 1918, and everybody continued firing up until the last seconds before the armistice went into effect. And scattered fighting occurs. There is evidence, perhaps, that Iran's chain of command is broken in some places. You may have individual rogue commanders out there that are still shooting. That is certainly possible. It remains to be seen what effect this will have overall, but it could damage the ceasefire that's in place right now if they keep shooting. And I don't think they want to keep it going.
In our last minute, I wonder what you make of what you have seen of these US deployments, because I guess militaries around the world will have been watching this confrontation with interest to see what's deployed and how effective various weapons have been. Has anything stood out to you?
Okay, so we've known that missiles and drones were significant threats, and I can really best speak to the naval perspective more than others here. But what we did see again is that expeditionary naval combat power does work. You have aircraft carriers, surface warships, nuclear-powered submarines that have a lot of striking power available. And that was on display along with Air Force aircraft in this last conflict.
Okay, so by and large,
we've seen
the big guns worked. All right, well, we're gonna leave it there.
Yeah, by and large they did.
Yeah.
By and large they did work as planned and as designed. And this is one of those unique abilities the United States Navy has, is to bring this much combat capability into a region very quickly and remain on station for some time to execute it, even with problems like you've seen with the USS Ford that's now returning to station.
Thank you so much for joining us and talking us through that so clearly. Stephen Wills from the Centre for Maritime Strategy. Well, Gissou is an American-Iranian human rights lawyer who specialises in international criminal and human rights law. She's director of the Atlantic Council Strategic Litigation Project and joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. There's been a lot of focus on whether or not Donald Trump was threatening a war crime when he warned Iran that its whole civilization will die tonight. What's your take? Would some sort of carpet bombing of Iran have been a war crime?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, there's questions about whether or not this war is legal to begin with. But when it comes to deliberately attacking civilian infrastructure, as he claimed he would, because he mentioned power plants and other things, even if they are dual use, even if there is some military purpose that's also mixed with the civilian use, you cannot target that infrastructure if it would result in humanitarian catastrophe. It would not be proportional. And so the harm to civilians outweighs any prospective military advantage. So what he was saying in his rhetoric would be the intent to commit a war crime, and honestly would be the sort of thing that myself or colleagues would advance in a court of law to show that intent.
OK, but when questioned about those social media comments, the US president said he wasn't concerned about being prosecuted over human rights. Is he right to be so casual?
Well, President Trump and his administration have certainly signaled that they do not care much for multilateralism or the international legal order. I should remind us all that the Trump administration has issued targeted sanctions against the chief prosecutor at the International Criminal Court and against judges at the International Criminal Court. And those targeted sanctions, which include asset freezes and travel bans, are usually meant to change behavior of narco-terrorists, arms dealers, right? So not exactly the people who are investigating war crimes. So I think that shows where his priorities lie.
All right, but you say he doesn't care about legal sanctions. Isn't that because nobody can touch him?
The complicated thing is that in the memos that have come from the Office of Legal Counsel at the State Department about the actions that President Trump undertook in his first administration and also now, we see that they say that they're very unconcerned with the UN Charter. There is no mention of believing that they need to abide by that. And I think it's really a reflection of the fact that international criminal legal standards have been applied unevenly in our world. The United States is not a member of the International Criminal Court. I should note that Iran's government is also not a member of the International Criminal Court. And so that presents problems and gaps in accountability.
Right. So it's true then. No one can touch him for it.
I think that what can happen is that we need to continue to emphasize the norms. We know that politics change. We also know that there should be a change in government in the United States. And I think it will be incumbent upon people here, the free press, and civil society to really urge that leaders are held to account when they undertake actions that are unlawful.
You see, but it's not just America, is it? This war has seen the Americans kill nearly 200 people at an Iranian girls' school, mistakenly, they say. We've seen Israel's targeted killing of Iran's head of state, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And that's before we get into the thousands killed in Iran itself by the regime. And, as you mentioned, the likely illegality of this war in the first place. Is there a greater than zero chance of any of these things being formally investigated and the perpetrators brought to book in any forum?
The one thing I will say is that the United States military does, of course, undertake investigations when there are allegations of mistargeting, civilian casualties and things like that. So the Minab incident is under investigation. But I think we need to push for, and by we, I mean the international community, we need to really hold all country leaders to the same standard. So in the same breath, while we were dealing with the crimes against humanity that the Islamic Republic of Iran committed against its own citizens, we also need to be applying those standards across the globe, regardless of who the perpetrators are. I see a lot of discussion of how in a just war, those things shouldn't matter or somehow matter less, and that's simply not true. No matter what the justness of a war is, that doesn't impact whether or not the actions of alleged perpetrators are legal. It simply doesn't matter for that legal analysis. Thanks
for walking us through that so clearly, Giss. Giss Nia, a human rights lawyer from the Atlantic Council Strategic Litigation Project. Let's explore where Lebanon stands in this war that's been imposed on it. Fadi Nicholas Nassar is a senior fellow with the Middle East Institute. That's a non-partisan think tank, and he joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. The US and Israel, they are agreed at this stage that the ceasefire deal, the two-week ceasefire deal, does not include Lebanon, while Pakistan, which mediated the deal, says it did and does. So does the ceasefire stand any chance if the belligerents on one side actually disagree with the mediator about what's been agreed?
Thank you so much for having me. Look, we're in a moment of heightened uncertainty. What Washington and Tehran are negotiating or not negotiating behind closed doors remains unclear, as you point out. But on the ground in Lebanon, the message is unmistakable. Lebanon is currently not included in any ceasefire. We are so far hearing rhetoric from Tehran, as you pointed out, that it will escalate if fighting continues in Lebanon. On the other side, as you rightly pointed out, we're also hearing from Washington that it does not appear to consider Lebanon as part of any understanding. In moments like this, words matter less than actions, and the smoke rising across Lebanon tells the story far more than any statement. The bottom line is that the Lebanese state is sidelined, and ordinary Lebanese are the ones paying the price.
Except that you say what matters is what's going on the ground, not what people are saying. But ultimately, this will be decided on the basis of trust. This will be decided on the basis of an agreement that is drawn up. And what we've just seen is an agreement drawn up, and by the time everybody gets out the door, everybody is saying, it said this and it didn't say, what we said before is not what we're saying now. And we know that that's what happened, certainly with President Trump. When Pakistan said this agreement, Pakistan specifically said this agreement covers Lebanon, Trump said, yes, this is an agreement that covers the Middle East. He only changed it after Israel said that Lebanon was out. So how do you do a deal with people who change the terms after the deal is done?
I don't think that's unique to conflict or to negotiations. In fact, we don't really know what's going on. There's so much uncertainty. It's difficult for us who are hoping for different types of outcomes. But often in these few days, what we need to pay attention to is what's unfolding on the ground. And right now, if you're asking me, is Lebanon part of that type of arrangement? The attacks suggest otherwise.
The attacks, we heard our Beirut bureau chief describe today's Israeli attacks on Lebanon as unexpected and unprecedented. What do you think is behind the ferocity, the scale of these latest attacks?
Yeah, in the span of minutes, more than 100 Israeli strikes lit up the country. It's terrifying, and it's painfully familiar because it exposes the core of the problem. The Lebanese state does not decide war. It does not decide peace, and Lebanon remains a front line in a wider regional conflict. And as always, it's worth emphasizing it is the people, the families, the children who are left to bear the cost of that dysfunction.
Right. But the increased scale and tempo of this war, what does that tell you about what Israel is trying to achieve? Are these attacks targeted at Hezbollah militants or the Lebanese population at large?
I think Israel's campaign aims to defeat Hezbollah, but at the same time, that infrastructure is also in highly populated areas. And so, in other words, Israel's war is with Hezbollah, but Lebanon is paying the price of that war. We've seen over 1 million people displaced. We've seen horrifying images of parents burying children, cities and homes shattered. This is not Lebanon's war. It is a war fought on Lebanon's soil for forces beyond its control. And what I would stress here is Lebanon's role as a forward base for Iran's conflict with Israel does not serve the Lebanese. At the same time, Israeli force is not a lasting solution. I would end it with this. The only way forward is a sovereign Lebanese state, one that decides war, one that decides peace, and one that protects its citizens instead of leaving them in the crossfire of a terrible conflict that has nothing to do with them.
Good talking to you. Thank you for joining us. Fadi Nicholas Nassar from the Middle East Institute.
Thank you for having me.